Men and women are at war today, right to left, left to right, back and forth, bickering and arguing about what is missing from both sides. Men are complaining and making huge cases about modern women.
Here's my thing with modern day women.
Like the title of the show, Modern Women Are the Woke.
Modern women hate this broadcast because it's shining a big light and saying, you ain't all that. Put a woman on a pedestal, guess what happens? She starts to look down on you, and that is a problem. Women want to be with guys that they can have to look up to, not the other way around. Men lead, women follow. Knock her off that pedestal so she gets back down to your level and looks up to you. All right?
Women making extreme cases about modern men, what's missing, what's lacking.
I am so effing tired of the amount of emotional labor that comes with dating Black men.
Men are literally disgusting, and the fact that I am still attracted to them goes to show you that sexuality is 100% not a choice.
Men are the scum of the earth. That is the message.
And in the midst of all of this that's going on, it's getting loud. It's getting noisy. What I've noticed in this space of relationships and navigating relationships is that there is something critically missing from both men and women that I think is so important to attribute and exercise if we're actually going to not only make progress in these conversations, but actually invest in transforming lives around us through the relationships that we carry as individuals with people that we're surrounded by. And the biggest thing that is missing is grace and truth.
Tell him I got the juice.
Oftentimes we have a habit of throwing a lot of truth at people, but when we throw a lot of truth, regardless of statistics or personal experiences, maybe even opinionated, but is definitely said in a manner that carries some kind of conviction or presumably some level of truth, there isn't room to receive the message, digest it, and actually analyze what is being said. Instead, walls of offenses come up, no conversation is created, and people are quick to project, yell, scream, and even fight on numerous occasions due to what's taking place or what was said. Whereas there is another extreme of grace, where so much grace is given and not a whole lot of truth is possibly granted. So there's not even a possibility of transformation taking place because a lot of things are being slid under the door, under the doormat, and ignored in some kind of capacity, all for the sake of just having peace and just being kind and just allowing things to just come together and love one another in kumbaya. When in reality, there is a necessity to hold the tension of grace and truth. Grace is what gives us the capacity to understand where somebody is coming from and extending an arm of love and patience in order to see the person where they are and to see the journey that they've made, stepping into their shoes and seeing their perspective. And on the same token, truth, explaining things for what they are and what they should be from a foundation of moving in truth, looking at the world in an optimal, flourishing way, and deciding the foundation and core values that uphold the direction that we ought to carry this perspective, this outlook, and how we're actually going to create a better scenario, situation, and environment for the relationships that we're looking to create, starting with ourselves and the patterns we create. And the biggest place that I get all of this from is actually a very interesting scripture in mind. John chapter 8, verse 1 says, "But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him. And he sat down to teach them. Teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, 'Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law of Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?' They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. So Jesus is caught in the middle, right? If he sides with the Pharisees, oh, he's just another religious leader. He's just it's definitely not a picture of who Jesus is and all that he's taught, all that he's moving in, and all that he's questioned, right? And then, of course, if they're trying to make him choose an extreme, right? You choose the Pharisees or you choose to stand with this woman. If you stand with this woman, oh, then you must be for adultery. You must not truly be who you say you are. He's in the middle of a woman who is embarrassed, who is ashamed, who is potentially filled with guilt. And then you have the Pharisees, right? The religious leaders, the religious law, right? Law of Moses, trying to pin him up against the law and the word. Verse 6, but Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. Very interesting. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away, one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." Now, in terms of grace and truth, right? Such a tension, such a tense spot, such a spot that causes some level of pressure. You have extremes surrounding you, and there seems to be a pressure to choose, right? Well, we get this sense of Jesus being grace and truth from John chapter 1, verse 14, of course, in the context, John being the beloved disciple of Jesus and introducing this beautiful book that so many use as a reference to start someone off in their journey to understanding who Jesus is, which is a beautiful place to start. John chapter 1, verse 14 reads this: "The word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." That's such a tense space to be at, full of grace and truth. So we have two extremes that are presented in the midst of this dilemma that Jesus finds is now being presented in front of, with a woman who's caught in adultery and the Pharisees looking for him to choose. And it's so much of that happening in such a context that we could pull into this space today, where there are so many extremes where people are going and over course correcting in the relationship space. They're over course correcting in so many spaces due to experiences, due to other people who have hurt them, who have caused some kind of manipulation and needing to be healed, right? Needing to go through a journey where they need to get their mental state in check and their spiritual and emotional levels in check. They're dealing with a lot of weight of people's decisions and how they responded to them. You have so many people who are moving in extremes where we're generalizing everybody. And because of one person or a couple people or a few people who did something to them, now everybody has to pay the price. Now all men are dogs. All men aren't about anything. How about the women? All women are godless and not God-fearing. All women are terrible. You know, you're not as dope as you think you are, and you really don't have it like that. And we need to treat all women in such a way, right, where they're all trying to spend their 20s wasting their time in raising body counts and all these kinds of things just to turn around in their 30s and settle down. Sounds familiar? It's because it's a message that's been portrayed so much in our culture over the last several years. And with that has come with a lot of fear. Men and young men afraid to step into relationships, marriage no longer seen as a place of covenant and is only seen as something that is contractual. And I'm only going to step into this if my end is done. And if you're able to serve me and I'm able to give something to you, cool. But if there's nothing there, then hey, I'm at risk of losing everything. It's not beneficial for the man. It's not beneficial for him to step into marriage. All these different types of conversations that are being had today. And this very scripture, this woman is brought in front of the feet of Jesus, embarrassed, ashamed, and filled with guilt, and is being called out for an adulterous action that she committed. Now, I want you to see something, because this is kind of where all this conversation starts in John chapter 8 for us, in why this relates to this conversation. So I want to show you something in verse 5 where it reads, "In the law of Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" And this kind of starts off our conversation and trying to really bring this home when we speak of tension in relationships and how we ought to operate in grace and truth, because these individuals, the Pharisees, the religious leaders of this time, are referring to the law of Moses, Old Testament writing that we have set in front of us in scripture, as a way to deal with the woman. And seemingly what they're referring to is the woman only regarding the adultery. But we see how this isn't the case as we go to Leviticus chapter 20 and verse 10. This is the same law that they're trying to refer to, but yet their actions are saying something completely different. Verse 10 reads this: "If a man commits adultery with another man's wife, with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress are to be put to death." Now, this is interesting. We have the religious leaders who are only bringing the woman at the feet of Jesus. But where's the man? He's just as liable in this situation, because it takes two to commit adultery. It doesn't just take one, it takes two. And so they're missing that. And a lot of times in culture, just to really tie into what we see today within relationships between men and women, there's a similar divide. We have men who are so gung-ho and so fascinated in calling out women and making sure that women are held accountable for their actions, so on and so forth, whereas women have often done the same to men. And what we fail to recognize is that both are accountable. Both need to be held accountable, right? It's not just one and not the other. It's not just women need to be held accountable and men are okay and men have done nothing wrong and it's all the women's fault. No, 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 no. There's some accountability that's necessary to be had among the men towards what's taking place for women and how women operate and move along the way. And there's so much to understand in that, but there is something that you've deposited in that as well that we need to take accountability for. Same with the women to the men. Hey, it's not that all men aren't anything and all men are just toxic and terrible and dogs. No, there's some accountability to the decisions of the men that you've chosen, right? There's accountability that needs to be had towards the people that have been chosen, that you've chosen to be with and do in your life. And as a result, it wasn't really a good fit. There's so much accountability that is necessary to be had on both sides. And what's interesting is it's the patterns that are carried between both men and women, mindsets, paradigms, beliefs, values that are typically carried with each person that is brought into scenarios and situations that also have such strong groundwork for why results are the way they are, where they came from, and furthermore, how they're operating and going about it. So what's the point, right? What's the point of all of this? Well, listen and look back to what Jesus responds, even in the midst of such a tense opportunity where he is being seemingly cornered to pick a side, seemingly cornered to pick either the side of the adulteress or the side of the religious leaders. Verse 6b, right? But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. Now, granted, none of us know what Jesus wrote. We can all only assume what Jesus potentially wrote. But regardless, he bends down and writes something on the ground. And it's apparent potentially that whatever was written on the ground, these individuals notice it. They keep questioning him. He straightened up and said to them, whatever was written on the ground, it must have been something that kind of sparked this. Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground, did it twice. At this, those who heard began to go away, one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. And I just wonder, regardless of potentially what was wrote, and we can all make somewhat of some educational guesses as to possibly what was written. None of us truly know. But for the sake of this conversation, I just wonder if you were present in this situation. I wonder what would have been written on the ground if you were present that would have shown up as Jesus is writing it, that would have sparked something in your heart to be like, oh, snap, and drop the rock, drop the stone, right? Because you recognize that I have some failures and some humanity in me too, some wrong decisions too, some jacked up thoughts too, and some things that I might be doing behind the scenes that just haven't been exposed yet. So I probably should just lay off a little bit. I wonder if you were in that position, what would Jesus have written that would have exposed to your heart that, ooh, nah, I probably shouldn't be here. And that's the approach, man, when it comes to having this tension of grace and truth. That is really where we are able to hold that tension, to recognize that even though that might be true, what this person did is true. There's no escaping that. How this person acts and responds is true. There's no escaping that. Maybe this is really how the culture and dating world is with men and women, and so many people are moving in this way. And man, I can see some of those tendencies in myself, maybe not there, but in some different directions, where I've got some animalistic behaviors and some thoughts that kind of go through my mind. And maybe I shouldn't be the one to throw the first stone and try to be a part of the whole canceling program and trying to throw people under the bus and sell them down the river. Because you know what? Yeah, I may not have done that, but I've done some other things. Yeah, I've done some other things. And this is what creates the space to have grace and truth in the relationships and conversations you carry. Recognizing that even though you may not have done that thing specifically, you've done some things that have been questionable, scary, and very tough. And there are some thoughts you've had, some things you wanted to do, some things you did do that if other people knew, whoo, it would be tough. Hey, I'm right there with you. I've done some. I know the thoughts. I've had some thoughts myself. I've had some of those impulses myself. And so it's important that when we have these conversations with grace and truth, that we are able to put ourselves in a position to approach people in humility and not look to cancel them and throw stones at them, because we've done some things too. And all it takes is some reflection, not projection, but reflection, reflecting on where we are, reflecting on where we came from, reflecting on the decisions that we've made, that allows us to show grace to other people. But you also want to know what allows us to show grace to other people who might be in these positions. Again, men and women, the relationships that we carry is getting an understanding on the context behind such comments being made. What is really influencing that person to say that all men aren't anything? What's really influencing that guy to scare young guys away from investing their time into one woman? And to investing their time into building a genuine relationship with somebody, to be open and vulnerable, and to love a female and to love someone, right? What's keeping that from them? And I think if we move in curiosity like that, we kind of get some understanding, not to say that we agree, but to say, hey, I actually see where you're coming from and how you ended up here. Truth is, it's possible that you've got some open wounds that haven't been closed, stitched up, and healed yet. It's possible that you're reminded of your first heartbreak. You're reminded of your first rejection or the numerous and multiple rejections that you've had. Maybe there's some things that have happened to you that you really haven't dealt with. You didn't really allow yourself to feel the feelings, possibly. And so, hey, man, you just kind of went out of your way to find every numbing device you could because you were running away from the thoughts. You were running away from all those insecurities that came back up, right? And there's a story behind the positioning you're taking. There's a story behind where you arrived and where you're at. Hey, let's not stop with the men. Let's look at the women. The women have stories too. Maybe there's some women that have come from a background where, man, they saw their mom do everything because they didn't have a father in the house. So they're dealing with not only a father wound, but they were also encouraged by seeing their mother do everything, play both the mom and the role of the dad in the household and for the children and for her. And so she witnessed her mom do everything. So that's why she may carry that INDEPENDENT. Do you know what that means? Kind of attitude. That might be why she's moving in that direction, because she was influenced by her mother. There might have been possibly for some context where maybe their mom spent a lot of time dogging their dad and dogging their biological father and bringing in other men in their life and continuously saying, hey, you don't need no man because you don't want to trust no man for nothing. And so there's a lot of resources that have been poured into them that allowed them to build this paradigm that they didn't really need a man. And so now they're coming to these places as they're older and they're trying to navigate through things and they're thinking, hey, like, man, shoot, I mean, I kind of was always, I guess my mom was right. And so, hey, I'm just gonna try to get everything I can. Does it make it right? No. No one's saying that it makes it right. But what we do is we get understanding. That's why that's something that's operating in you, right? It's possible that you didn't have great experiences with guys when you were dating. It's possible that you dealt with a lot of manipulation. You dealt with a lot of trickery, right? You dealt with a lot of that. And so there's some potential necessity to get an understanding on where somebody's coming from to see, oh, that's how you landed there. That's how you're operating. And perspective and understanding is key. Let's go back to the men for just a quick second, because there's so many conversations of women being more choosy. Right. They want men who are emotionally available and intelligent and understanding. And yet men are scratching their heads because they're like, well, what do you mean by this? I mean, this doesn't seem right at all. And let's get some understanding on that perspective, ladies, because it's possible that the guys that you're pursuing, the men that you're trying to get with and you're trying to move romantically, maybe they were wired with as they were younger was they were supposed to be the provider, because that's what it meant to be a man. That's what it meant to be a man, to bring home the bacon and have the money and have the finances and have the house, because that's what they were trained up for in their childhood. They saw their dad do it. Maybe they didn't have a dad do it, but they saw their mom consistently struggle. They saw their mom go through things as a single mother, much like possibly yourself. And so they were like, man, I guess my role is to really provide. And they stepped into that space early. Right? They stepped in that space earlier than maybe they should have. And so they experienced some things. They saw some things. And so maybe they weren't equipped to realize that, man, emotional availability is something that's necessary. Dealing with my emotions and expressing them in a communicative way that allows her to feel heard, seen, and understood, and allows a safe space to be created, asking questions, moving in curiosity. Those kinds of things weren't something that they were equipped with. And so there's a lot of men who are scratching their heads and wondering where to go, because all I was taught to do was Being a man meant paying the bills and providing and bringing the bread home. And we've got women who, man, amazingly are growing, amazingly are doing well. And it doesn't have to be a dog eat dog. It doesn't have to be a situation where men have to rise and women have to fall, or women have to be knocked off their pedestal. So they're looking back up to men. And by way of doing that, that they have to be destroyed or devalued, right? Like, it doesn't have to get there. We can both win. And it's amazing how women are elevating and doing amazing things in this world and are earning better jobs, earning better income. It's amazing. And we don't have to tear them down. Just like women, we don't have to tear down men who may not be in a position where they've developed certain skills like that. Now, does that mean they stay there? Does that mean we stay there? Absolutely not. We put our emphasis, we put our understanding, we put our places together, our resources together, and we're able to build that. But we have to get an understanding on where people are. And we have to be willing to see from their perspective and where they're standing and recognize that we're able to complement each other, because that's what men and women are supposed to do, complement one another. There are some areas that I'm weak at that, hey, I would love for my lady to be strong at. That's how we complement one another. She's weaker in some areas. I'm stronger in some areas. We complement one another. We aren't spending our time trying to compete and over beat one another or topple over one another. No, we're complementing each other side by side, doing things together. And that's really where it's at. But in order to have those conversations, y'all, grace and truth is necessary. Not just truth throwing statistics in your face and trying to prove you wrong, but moving in grace where there's room to understand. There's room for us to come to the table and have the conversations in brevity, not call each other out of our names, not be disrespectful, not be condescending, not devalue the other person so we look stronger. Because truth is, there's oftentimes where we find ourselves doing that because we want to look good. And that's the human deficiency. We've all had it in some kind of area. But it's a point and emphasis where we must be willing to come to the table. And we must have those conversations. You never know what people have gone through. You never know the stories that people have had that brought them to where they are. And so it's important that we understand that and we get some perspective on that. Now, does that mean you have to stay? No, I'm not saying you have to stay and you have to settle, but getting an understanding helps you be able to make better decisions, more decisions filled with wisdom, and trying to understand what you have the capacity for to continue moving along with. We all got junk. We all have made some compromising decisions, and we've all got some stories to us. And it's important that we move with a place of understanding. And I think one of the greatest places to do that is reflecting on yourself, reflecting on the moments and spaces where you fall short and you've compromised and you've made some poor decisions, because that will cause you to halt. I shouldn't look to destroy this lady. I shouldn't look to destroy this guy, because, man, I've made some decisions myself, if I'm being honest. And this tension of grace and truth that we ultimately see as we wrap up in this John 8 look, and this woman who is embarrassed, who is hurt, who is rattled, and Jesus's response isn't to condemn her and join the Pharisees, and it also isn't to give permission to her activity, but it is to remain in that contention, remain in that tension, and remain in that space. Hold grace where he removes her accusers, and shows truth where he then tells her to go and sin no more, where he says, I'm not even your accuser. Do you see any of them? No, sir. Neither am I one. Go and sin no more. Grace and truth is what allows our walls of offense to come down and allows us to sit at the table, sit down with one another, and have conversation with one another, loving one another, cherishing one another, showing good faith, and being able to allow Jesus to be the example, where we're able to say, man, even though this isn't something I would have done or I've done, or maybe I did it in a different way, maybe I did it in a different space, maybe I compromised in something differently. Regardless, grace and truth is necessary, because with grace, we're able to create spaces of understanding. Grace, truth, and love are three components that are necessary, and all three are needed for the full picture. Two of the three or one of the three, we don't have a full picture. We don't have a full opportunity of transformation. We don't have a full opportunity to actually hear one another, listen to one another, and more importantly, see one another for where we are and move with the love of Christ. By this shall men know that you're my disciples, if you have love one for another. When we talk about relationships, when we talk about the relationships that you and I carry, the point of me bringing this text to you is to really emphasize the importance of moving with grace and truth. Let's not focus on bringing up all the statistics in the world to try and dethrone, devalue, and destroy others. Let's not use our limited experiences to generalize everybody and say everyone fits into the category of the percentages that we see statistically, and everybody fits into the category of the things that I've experienced. Because this one guy did it, then all guys are trash and they all do it. And just because this one girl broke my heart and rejected me, hey, all women are terrible. Modern women aren't about anything. And you just need to focus on raising your body counts and not even investing in a girl. We got to be willing to not over course correct and be willing to sit back and deal with these conversations in grace and truth for ourselves and in turn with others. And the tension in relationships is being able to be in that tension, not go to one extreme, not dive headfirst into another extreme, but be like Jesus. Look to implement our lives after Jesus, to thirst after the lifestyle that follows or shows, reveals the principles and the fruit that Jesus speaks of and walked in, to be able to hold that tension and say, man, I may not necessarily agree with where you are, how you're going about it, but I can understand where you're coming from. I can understand how you got there. If I just take a second to put my feet in your shoes and just get a glimpse of your story, what you saw, I might be able to walk away with a little bit more understanding and not be so quick to destroy you and not be so quick to stomp you out and throw you away and not be so quick to try to generalize everybody and doing a disservice to those who don't even fit the descriptions of what we're generalizing. Failing to really see that we're literally cutting ourselves off from having a phenomenal opportunity at a phenomenal relationship and really, really doing things the right way. Grace and truth. It's something that is difficult to hold, a tension that causes growth and makes us uncomfortable, but is a tension that is necessary if we want the best out of relationships and if we want to really create happy, healthy, whole, and biblical relationships with others. I appreciate you guys so much for tuning into this video. If you like this kind of content, be sure to subscribe, turn on the post notifications so you know the next time we're posting. Share this with a friend who also wants to kind of learn the tension that we see today between men and women, relationships, and how we ought to operate in such tension that is necessary to hold with grace and truth. I appreciate you guys so much. And until our next conversation, be easy and be breezy, my friend. Hey, peace.